I will get going with calling this meeting to order. My name is Jen Rowe. I'm the chair of the Boston Region MPO's Tip Process Engagement Readiness Committee, and I will call the meeting to order and begin reading through the various notices we have. All right. So you're invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, and national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status, or other background. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, Level AA standards, and revised Section 508 standards. If you do require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, or if you have any technical difficulties, Adriana Jacobson from MPO staff is the person to connect with. That's AJACOBSEN@ctps.org or 857-702-3663. Or also Adriana is available via the chat box. Great. So all participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. We ask that everyone rename yourself with your first name, last name, and affiliation. We've set up the Zoom, so you should be able to mute and unmute. That said, please try to stay muted unless you're actively speaking. And we ask that if you do wish to speak, to raise your hand and wait to be called upon. Zoom does have the raise hand function that you can find by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of the screen. A window will pop up with the raised hand button at the bottom. You can also use the reactions button in the toolbar. And if you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. Great. So with that, I'll take a roll. Again, for anyone who just joined, I'm Jen Rowe. I chair this committee and represent the city of Boston. I'll now call upon MassDOT Seat 1.
Derek Cravat here from MassDOT Office of Transportation Planning.
MassDOT Seat 2.
This is John Bouchard from MassDOT, representing Jonathan Gulliver, Highway Administrator. Sorry, I'm on the road today, so I'm using my phone. I will mute so I don't disturb anyone, but if I'll be prepared to discuss any items. Thank you.
Thanks, John. MAPC.
Good afternoon, Eric Bourassa with MAPC.
Thanks, Eric. Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
Leonard Diggins, and I apologize, my background's going to be loud at times for about the next hour or so.
Thanks, Len. Town of Brookline.
Good afternoon, Erin Chute, Town of Brookline.
Thanks, Erin. Town of Arlington.
Hello, this is John Alessi with the Town of Arlington.
Thanks, John. I believe Brad kind of messaged ahead of time saying that he wouldn't be able to make it. Is that correct? Anyone else from the Inner Core Committee, City of Somerville? Okay, not seeing anyone. Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham. Looks like Dennis is not here either, and Christian Grichard from the Minuteman Advisory Group, Interlocal Coordination, Town of Acton, also messaged in advance. But I do believe we still have quorum, so we'll keep going. We do typically now provide an opportunity for public comment, traditionally offered at the outset of committee meetings. That said, we also welcome folks to contribute to discussion throughout the meeting. So there's no pressure to comment at this particular juncture if you're able to stay on. All that said, if there's someone who would like to take the opportunity to speak now, please raise your hand and I'll call on you. All right. Seeing no one, no raised hands, let's move on to our first order of business today, which I believe is some housekeeping. We have some meeting minutes to approve from the thick of TIP development season, and I believe Ethan has a few words about these minutes before ask for a motion to approve.
Yes, thank you, Jen, and good afternoon, folks. So with regard to the next 3 action items that are being presented here, these will be voted on separately for each set of meeting minutes. First off, I appreciate everybody's patience as we move through the approvals on these minutes and in your review of them, which were posted last week. This isn't going to be an unusual request, I hope, where we ask members to approve multiple sets of minutes in one meeting. This is mostly with regard to, as Jen just mentioned, the amount of content that was being generated earlier this past spring while we were working on the TIP, and also the brisk cadence with which we were holding MPO meetings of this committee here. So again, we don't anticipate this to be a recurring thing. Hopefully this is, knock on wood, the only tipper meeting in which we'll be asking members to read and approve multiple sets of meeting minutes before one event. So with that, we are requesting a review and vote to endorse of the March 14th meeting minutes, and I'm happy to field any questions or corrections folks may have on that meeting set.
Thanks, Ethan. Thanks, everyone on staff who contributed to pulling these minutes together. I know it's a labor-intensive process. So yeah, does anyone have any questions, comments, corrections, anything of that nature? All right. Seeing none, would someone volunteer to bring a motion to endorse the meeting minutes? Derek.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to endorse the March 14th meeting minutes.
Thanks, Derek. John.
I will second that motion.
Thank you. Awesome. Let's go ahead and call roll then. See, we have. Oh, I guess I'll do. I have. I guess I'll call Derek again, even though you brought the motion. Do you?
Yeah, sure.
approve?
Derek Cravette, yes.
NASDOT C2, John. He's driving it on the phone, so maybe I'll loop back to John, or feel free to pop in when you're at a good point. MAPC, Eric.
Eric Barassa, yes.
Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
Diggins, yes.
Town of Brookline.
Aaron Shute, yes.
Thank you. Town of Arlington, John.
John Alessi, yes.
In a quarter, it's getting much rest. So I think we'll be, I guess, I, as chair, vote yes, and maybe looping back to John. Do we have quorum with or without John?
I believe the motion would pass, and we would still have quorum as well if John can do it.
John Bouchard was yes. I'm sorry, I have double mutes going on my phone.
Oh no. But we got through. Awesome. Well, that motion passed. We'll move to the next set of minutes.
Yes, so this next meeting minute set is for the March 28th TIP committee meeting, which covered the final adjustments to project programming scenarios towards the end of March before release of the draft TIP in April. So staff are once again requesting a review and vote to endorse this meeting minute summary.
Thanks, Ethan. Anyone have anything they'd like to note of meeting minutes? March 28th.
I have one note, Jen, on page 5 of those March 28th meeting minutes. Leon Gaumond was represented as being from the town of Arlington. He's from the town of Weston. He was correct in the other attendees, but just was in the document when he commented. That's the only thing I found.
That a friendly change, staff? Okay, I see a thumbs
We'll
up.
correct that.
Excellent. John.
So with that correction, I'll move to endorse the summary of the meeting on March 28th, 2024.
Thanks, John. Do we have a second?
I
Derek.
will second that. Derek Cravat.
Great. Let's go through roll in. Derek,
Derek Cravat, yes.
John,
John Bouchard, yes.
Eric,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Len,
Higgins, yes.
Aaron. Aaron,
Aaron Shute, yes.
thank you. And John.
John Alessi, yes.
Okay, I think, and as chair, I vote yes as well. So I think that's roll for the second set. Final one.
Okay, thank you everybody for your patience on this. This is on the next slide, the third and final set of meeting minutes up for approval today for the May 16th meeting of the TIP Process Engagement Readiness Committee. These meeting minutes, as a refresher, represented some of the corrections that took place between the release of the draft TIP and the request to endorse the final TIP at the June 6th MPO meeting there. And staff are once again requesting a vote to endorse this meeting summary.
Thanks, Ethan. Anyone have comments related to this set of meeting minutes from May 16th? Seeing none, could someone volunteer to motion for this set of minutes? John,
I will move to endorse the summary of the May 16th, 2024 meeting minutes.
thank you.
And
Derek,
I will second that motion. Thank you.
fantastic. We're tag teaming those. And Derek, since you're still off mute, would
Yes,
you vote, sir?
Derek Cravat, yes.
thank you. John Bouchard,
John Bouchard, yes.
Eric Barassa,
Eric Barassa, yes.
Len Diggins,
Higgins, yes.
Aaron Shute,
Aaron Shute, yes.
John Alessi.
John Alessi, yes.
Great. And I'll also vote to approve, and I think we've gotten through all three. Thank you, everyone. So with that, we'll move on to the main order of business, which is a review of process improvements for information sharing about TIP decision making. This is an item that is kind of follows from our retrospective. We had a couple TIPper meetings prior to this. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ethan to kind of summarize how staff is responding or suggesting that we might respond to some of these comments.
Thank you, Jen. So moving on into today's primary presentation, this is going to be, as Jen mentioned, a review of process improvements that MPO staff are hoping to deploy in conjunction with our partners over at MassDOT, regional transit authorities, and the MBTA to provide additional information to MPO board members and other stakeholders as we move forward with developing the federal fiscal year 2026 to 30 TIP and subsequent efforts. So if we can move on to the next slide to provide an overview as to how this presentation is going to be structured. I'll start off with a discussion on what we have discussed at recent TIP committee meetings and also MPO board meetings around these kinds of efforts, and also relate this to another committee of the MPO, which is the Memorandum of Understanding Update Committee, or MOU Update Committee. Also then go into more detail on some tentative in development activities that staff are investigating with regard to how we can better improve coordination, not only between the MPO and other agencies, but also the MPO and municipal project proponents, specifically to help improve information around project readiness updates, cost, and also moving towards specific, targeted, and timely updates throughout the federal fiscal year to avoid a sudden influx of information being presented to MPO members just before decisions have to be made. And of course, there will also be an opportunity at the end of this presentation for some discussion, questions, and potentially tweaks to some of these improvements. Again, these are preliminary, they are in process and still under consideration, so things are very much subject to change as we move forward. Moving on to the next slide to kind of give an overview on those prior meetings, and the next one, please. So at the May 16th meeting of the TIPper committee, we used that meeting to work to highlight what had taken place as far as changes that emerged between the draft and final tip and some of the challenges that emerged there. This was relevant to today's discussion in the sense of some of the cost increases and when those cost increases were flagged alongside the justifications for different projects in both the regional target and statewide highway programs, the requests for which were then adopted at the June 6th MPO meeting. We then, after that June 6th MPO meeting, reviewed the entire tip process and reflected along the retrospective activities we had undertaken to better investigate and interrogate different ways that information could be brought forth in a more timely manner and also in a more detailed manner. Information such as if this project is funded, what are the benefits of it? For example, making sure that all projects the MPO considers for regional prioritization are adequately scored at the time of the vote, and also ensuring across all forms of feedback we had that whenever a vote was taking place around the tip or whenever a presentation was provided, that information was provided in a timely manner with sufficient time provided to review it and also sufficient level of detail. This doesn't just mean with regard to approving tip scenarios, but also providing the scores for final projects or even the tip universe of projects. So again, kind of repeating some things here on the next slide, there were certain specific calls for informational needs, namely some strain around the limited time that was available to identify fill-in projects for funding that had not yet been scored. As some may recall, there was a large amount of funding available in the amount of around $60 million, I believe, if I'm recalling correctly, in federal fiscal year 2025, around $30 million in federal fiscal year 2026, but inversely a deficit in federal fiscal years 27 and 28. And again, there was very limited time available to score and evaluate projects for the surplus, and also to interrogate and identify ways of resolving that deficit by selecting projects, or rather selecting from among multiple projects that may require a delay. And of course, as part of how MPO members may select between different groups of projects and make those decisions, identifying each of the alternatives that may emerge or different conditions or results that may happen should one project be selected over another with regard to consequences. And then, of course, especially with regard to how decisions were made around resolving the federal fiscal year 2027 deficit, further interrogating and better understanding the reasons why projects may have seen one or more changes to their readiness date for advertisement, multiple changes or adjustments to cost increases, or any scope changes on a project. So this is a statement really of a lot of the challenges that we saw over the past year. I'm going to take another step to a related topic on this next slide, which discusses the Memorandum of Understanding that the Boston Region MPO has. Moving on to the next slide, please, and how eventually, at the end of this, I will relate that to the statement of challenges here. So the Memorandum of Understanding, which is usually called the MOU, acts as an agreement between the MPO, the Commonwealth, and all providers of public transportation, including the MBTA, the Metro West Regional Transit Authority, and the Cape Ann Transportation Authority, to carry out the transportation planning process. Specifically, the MOU helps to outline the development not only of the TIP each year, but also when the Long Range Transportation Plan, or LRTP, is in development. At this time, the Boston Region MPO is in the process of updating its MOU document, hence the MOU committee I referenced earlier. And as this update has been progressing, staff and the MOU committee have worked to incorporate much of the feedback that we received over the past year of development for the federal fiscal years 2025 to 29 TIP to ensure that we can better improve coordination around the 2026 and 2030 TIPs and beyond, or TIP and beyond, to be more specific. So specifically, if we look more at the interagency coordination side of the MOU on the next slide, the MOU is not does not stand alone as a document, as complemented by an operations plan. And the operations plan really lines up how the different transportation planning processes are to be conducted. Specifically within Section 8 of the draft operations plan, because again, this is all in development, that includes processes with regard to the solicitation of project information for TIP development, not only from municipal project proponents seeking regional prioritization, but also with regard to that fill-in challenge, MassDOT, the MBTA, the Metro West Regional Transit Authority, and the Cape Ann Transportation Authorities. I would note that much of the feedback that staff also received emphasized the need to consider other project proponents that may not be municipalities, such as DCR and Massport. While these are not included in the operations plan, I will also just note here as well that we are also looking at ways to better engage them in this process in addition. As we look to advance and expand, or rather tighten up the processes and better outline the level of detail we're going to require and the timeliness of information required for project applications, this will make sure that hopefully all projects that are funded in the regional prioritization section of the TIP are adequately scored and evaluated before MPO members consider them. This therefore not only would include projects submitted in that application window that usually takes place between early November and the end of the calendar year, but also potentially any fill-in projects. In addition, while I don't mention it explicitly later in this presentation, there's also a request within Section 8 of the operations plan to outline or identify a first-tier projects list, which is a more formal word really for a bench of projects that could be pulled from in order to utilize unallocated funds in future TIP development cycles. So if we can move on to the next slide. This is going to get into specific and more detailed actions that are being taken and additional forums through which information can be shared by project proponents. On the next slide, I will again reiterate that this is very much an early look at processes that are still in development and under consideration. MPO staff, MassDOT, and our partners over the regional transit authorities and the T are very much still working together to outline the specifics of how these meetings and actions are taking place. But generally, all of the parties here are supportive of this and are working towards trying to get some manner of this implemented within our current staff and time constraints. So, and again, a lot of the processes that are going to be outlined here are also subject to change pending additional public feedback around the development of the MOU, which is also out for public comment right now, and the operations plan. So on the subject of fill-in projects, if we can move on to the next slide, historically in recent TIP development cycles, many of the projects that have utilized unallocated regional target funds have been from transit authorities, specifically and especially historically, projects from the MBTA. In recent years, especially in the federal fiscal years 25-29 TIP, we have also leveraged our partnerships with the MWRTA and Cape Ann transportation authorities to better incorporate these projects. While those solicitations for projects did not follow a formal TIP application structure, one of the process improvements proposed here is to outline requirements around which transit projects can be applied for and when they can be received. This will help to ensure and create a pathway for these transit providers or public transportation providers to better accommodate the solicitation of projects window that happens in November, and also should additional resources be identified for projects after TIP readiness days, provide an end of February deadline for additional project submissions. By having an end of February deadline for all project applications, be they fill-in or otherwise, this helps to ensure there are at least 4 weeks available to evaluate projects that may be considered as fill-ins before MPO members begin commence programming scenario discussions in around mid-March to mid-April. Project proponents from especially the MBTA, MWRTA, and CADA would also be required to update the MPO board twice annually as to the status of MPO-funded projects. Functionally, there would be a February meeting, which would coincide with the TIP readiness days. It's important to emphasize that these would be MPO-funded projects only, not the totality of their capital programs, unless they wanted to provide insight into certain specific line items in those meetings. So again, this would only reflect projects that the MPO is funding, and it would solely serve to indicate whether or not prior funded projects were progressing towards their needed goals for advertisement. The February meeting that is proposed would also serve as an opportunity to perhaps ask for additional funding resources should that need be identified as part of their own respective capital planning processes. There is also the second meeting here, which would be the September end of federal fiscal year meeting, which would be a report by these transit authorities to indicate which projects have been obligated or advertised in that prior federal fiscal year. These meetings would functionally be short presentations complementary to activities that already take place for the highway projects, or I should say the roadway projects that the MPO often funds. If we can move on to the next slide, we then have a similar process improvement upgrade, really a new process here for their for project readiness updates on roadway and other projects that the MPO funds. So as has been mentioned earlier in this meeting, the TIP Readiness Days effort that MassDOT undertakes in early to mid-February drives most of the awareness of MPO members around where project readiness lies on all projects in both the regional target and the statewide highway programs. Given the breadth of projects not only within the Boston region and the statewide highway program, but also other MPO regions which are served by the same MassDOT highway districts as many MPO. There is a need for more information throughout the year to better understand how projects are faring, but to structure how that information flows so that it can be accommodated by both MPO and MassDOT staff. TIP readiness days under this proposed process, which I'll get into in a bit, will remain a sort of annual one-off level of effort where there is a very thorough, in-depth look at each project. But this new proposed project would complement the TIP readiness days 3 additional times per year each quarter to provide a focused quarterly update on specific projects that may be flagged either by the MassDOT highway districts at their discretion or MPO members, should there be specific projects of interest. For example, just to speak on these projects specifically, certain projects that may have followed this structure this past year would have been those about 8 or so projects that were flagged within federal fiscal year 2027 as potential candidates for delay or removal from the TIP. If we can go on to the next slide, I'll go into more detail on this process. This process was already highlighted at a previous MOU update committee meeting, so I'll just kind of hash it here. The process is cyclical in the sense where it generally begins through the agenda setting process at an MPO meeting, where MPO staff and MassDOT's Office of Transportation Planning staff would identify a specific date for the quarterly readiness update. Assuming that this is a cyclical and ongoing task, MPO staff would then work with MPO board members and other project proponents, including MassDOT highway districts, to compile a list of projects that members may have questions or comments on so that they may be addressed. We would then, through the Office of Transportation Planning, submit those comments, questions, and that project list to MassDOT Highway Division, which would then disseminate that to the highway districts as needed to respond to these inquiries and provide additional information. And again, they may indicate other projects that they may want to flag, be they within their statewide highway programs or other items given their unique perspectives on project delivery. With this information in hand, OTP would then provide the information to MassDOT, or I should say to MPO staff, and there would be a back and forth discussion between these parties to resolve any points of clarification or outstanding questions that may not have yet been addressed by members. This would then culminate in that quarterly readiness update meeting in which MPO staff would present project updates to the MPO board and solicit any follow-up needs or questions to be addressed at the next quarterly update. So specifically to provide some dates on this, if we go on to the next slide, a sample workflow for how these projects may look would be identifying projects that may have identifying projects, generally speaking, in December that may have an end of calendar, or I should say, we would leverage the meeting in December to reflect on projects that may have been advertised within the past calendar year, projects that were programmed in that year had been successfully obligated, and also to provide and solicit in sort of early warning for the TIP readiness days. That way, as projects are coming in through the application process, we can flag certain projects that may already be indicating that they may have issues with regard to acquiring right-of-way or progressing towards the 25% or 75% submissions to sort of help spread out the amount of readiness information that is presented to MPO members in February. Again, February would still remain the same TIP Readiness Days event that MassDOT holds, but there would also be a new addition, as mentioned previously, in the form of one of those twice-a-year transit presentations that would complement the one that MPO staff provide already at an MPO board meeting in February. In May, after a draft TIP is out for public comment, the next quarterly presentation would take place, primarily reviewing any changes to projects that had happened or transpired between a draft and final TIP. Again, using the example with the Western Route 30 project, one of those major cases this past year was monitoring how town meeting votes were progressing with regard to the appropriation of funding for project design. That is an example of such a thing that we may have identified and discussed in one of these May meetings. And then in September, right before the development of the next TIP development cycle. This would be an end of federal fiscal year outlook to make sure that all projects that the MPO had funded through the regional target program had successfully advertised with funding obligated in that prior federal fiscal year. It would also help to sort of set a tone for the development of that next TIP. So again, we recognize that this is a very large process in sense of coordination, not only between MassDOT and MPO staff and multiple layers of MassDOT staff, but also with our municipal project proponents. One of the other things we're hoping to do to facilitate this effort on the next slide is better incorporating municipal project proponent feedback into the main TIP Readiness Days meeting. Specifically, the existing TIP Readiness Day structure already provides a space for MPO staff to provide their perspective on how projects may be advancing based on how MPO staff understand what the municipalities are looking for. Traditionally, on the MPO side of things, this place for discussion and input is often used to highlight what projects are newly seeking funding for addition to the TIP, or here and there providing insights as to how design might be progressing on a locally funded project to help sort of facilitate or add additional context that districts may be looking at as projects are advancing. In order to foment this activity and this window of opportunity that already exists, MPO staff are looking to schedule what we're going to refer to as the pre-readiness days workshops, which would take place between January 14th and January 16th. This would be 3 days with 3 different meetings led by MPO staff and divided by MAPC subregion, looking at both currently programmed and any new regional target projects. If we can go on to the next slide, we would likely involve, I would say, both the MAPC subregional coordinators in this effort, though the presentations would be guided and directed by MPO staff in this case. Information obtained at these pre-readiness days meetings would then be related to the MassDOT district staff afterward, and then formally added into the MPO's readiness days submission later in January, so that it can be accounted for in the February readiness meeting. So again, this sort of is a twofold option. One, it helps to inform MassDOT's perspective on making recommendations around the TIP Readiness Days, but it also acts as a proactive opportunity and forum to get more information from the municipal perspective as to how their projects are advancing, where challenges may be arising, and what kinds of support they need. It also helps as another forum for new applicants to highlight and indicate their projects before a final score may be in place for that project, which generally happens in March. Now, I should just note here that this is a very tentative schedule that we've proposed here, and this would likely take effect for the federal fiscal years 2026 to 2030 TIP. I will just note that day 1 currently has about 28 projects listed on it based on our current breakout, whereas there's 14 on day 2 and 6 on day 3. So of those projects, a fair chunk of those are community connections, quick build projects, but we may rebalance this depending on the level of effort required by not only MPO staff and MAPC, but also the MassDOT highway districts, which might be interested in being involved here. I will just note the reason why there is a question mark under day 1 for District 3 is that if Metro West were to be moved to a separate day, District 3 would not need to attend that meeting. So if we can move on to the next slide, because this is a lot of different information I'm throwing here. This is a related activity that is also meant to help to a related option that is meant to help inform decision making, or rather facilitate decision making when projects may need to be reevaluated for inclusion on the TIP. So separate from the development of the operations plan, some MPO members have also suggested that the MPO board should devise and discuss policies about when projects that are currently funded on the TIP should be considered by MPO members for potential removal or delay should they have changes to project scope or significant repeated increases to project cost or readiness. Some members have, and other parties as well, have indicated that by establishing a protocol through these policies, this may provide for a more fair circumstance for both current and future project proponents to be evaluated against. It also sets a stricter standard for project performance. So it should be noted that as part of the TIP cost change committee some years back, there were thresholds set that could be triggered at MPO member discretion for a rescoring of projects, specifically projects that saw cost increases beyond a threshold of about 10%. With that said, this is at member discretion, And in this proposed situation, while this would still allow that policy to persist, we are sort of flagging now that we would like or would encourage members to consider creating policies around when a project may need to be taken off the tip, for example. Just as a totally hypothetical case, if a project has 4 consecutive years of delays due to an unresolved issue or an ongoing coordination issue on a project, just as one example. So if we can move on to the next slide. So again, on the next slide as well, right now, we are still evaluating a lot of these process improvements as part of the update to the operations plan and the memorandum of understanding. Everything I just discussed here today is a draft item, and we are presenting it here to discuss this in more detail. The next tip takes effect on federal fiscal year 2025, which is October 1st. Once that tip takes effect and we begin amending the federal fiscal year 25-29 tip, we will also commensurately begin developing the federal fiscal year 2026 to 2030 tip. As part of this development cycle, to kind of give an eye towards the next meeting of the tip process engagement and readiness committee, this will not only entail the deployment of some of these processes as they get ironed out, but also new project scoring criteria resulting from the conveyor study that has been ongoing at the MPO, improvements to the data and information availability around the tip universe of projects, and also any information that partner agencies may want to provide on potential applications to the next tip. I've also just added a note here where, again, the MOU, the draft memorandum of understanding, is out for public comment and is soliciting public comment through September 6th, which you can submit to publicinfo@ctps.org. So I know that was a lot of information. So I'm happy to field any questions and walk back a couple slides if there are specific items that folks want to maybe discuss in more detail.
So much, Ethan. That was a lot of information, but very helpfully broken out. I guess Eric, let's
Ethan, have you guys thought of putting all of this into like a schedule? In particularly, I really like the idea of having a more formal discussion with multiple sub-regions and the district offices about project status. And it'd be great to, get those on the calendar early. What time of year were you thinking? Is that like in January or is that in December?
So because these proposed processes are still being hashed out internally, we haven't committed to a date yet, but tentatively we have been thinking mid-January for that date.
Mid-January, yeah.
As that is generally when the initial readiness solicitation that MassDOT OTP puts out to the MPOs takes place.
Okay.
also aligns. I'm assuming you'll probably be sticking to the calendar of like end of calendar year first new project applications. So hopefully you'd have a pretty good sense of what's kind of coming up.
Yes, so we would still commit to a formal project application window. This year it will be between October 28th and December 31st, just to provide even a little bit more time for folks to get their applications in. With that said, I mentioned earlier that this process would also include a formal deadline of end of February for any fill-in projects as well. So we're still going to have formal solicitations that follow that first tier 2-month window. But if we identify additional funding resources, we will require that anybody that wishes to utilize those resources provide that project list so that those projects can be scored by the end of February.
You know, on the fill-in projects, do we have a criteria for like evaluating transit projects?
We do. As part of the transit transformation program that was developed, we adopted a formal criteria set for that, which was in effect for federal fiscal year 2025, or I should say the development of the last tip. However, we only received like 1 or 2 applications during the actual scoring period for that program, even though we funded many more projects as fill-ins later on. one of the things we are hoping to do in the next tip is to reevaluate some of those projects going forward, even though they will continue to be funded.
Right. So it would be good to, if like MBTA and RTA staff aren't familiar with that, it would be good for them to be familiar with it, just so they could even see what projects, score better than others according to, this criteria. Thanks.
Actually, could I make a quick request that I think there's probably like 4 different topics and 4 different slides that relate to different interventions, and I'm wondering if we could kind of have the slide deck go to the one that's kind of being discussed, which I think was previously the transit solicitation topic area, but
I believe
we'll
it's
see
slide
what.
21.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. And I think I'm assuming the order that they appear on my screen is the order that people had their hands up. Was it Len and then Aaron?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's how it usually works for me. But thanks, Madam Chair. So first, my request is that I get to see this deck, after this meeting, because I mean, there is a lot here. I mean, and generally, I have to read something like this like 4 or 5 times in order to avoid asking stupid questions, because there are stupid questions, and I usually ask them, especially if I haven't read something multiple times. So with that, about the only comment I have that actually involves the transit, the fill-in projects, and my feelings at this point be that I think we should lean towards them being transit projects, because I think that is probably the best way to make sure the fill-in projects are done in a more equitable manner. Because my sense is that most municipalities, especially the smaller ones, just don't have projects sitting around waiting and hoping for funding to come along. I mean, they generally have to have some reasonable expectation of funding before moving ahead. And probably the only municipalities that might have the luxury of having projects just sitting around would probably be the larger municipalities, which would create bias. And so I think with transit projects, we could perhaps avoid that kind of bias. If we have a bench of those projects, then we can work on the distribution that would be more equitable. But that's just my first pass at this comment. All right, that's it. Thank you.
Fun. Aaron.
Thank you. And thanks for your work on this, Ethan. It feels like it was very responsive to the last MPO meeting that we had. So I appreciate you pulling this together and the sort of many layers. I had a couple comments, but one that I was thinking about actually with the fill-in projects takes a different slant than I think what Len, you were just saying. I feel like there are municipal projects and some that we've seen keep getting pushed out further and further. And if there was a pathway for municipalities to continue forward with their design process and have projects at the ready for fill-in, and then all of those could be evaluated together, I feel like it really would be more equitable to have some of those municipalities having an opportunity to forward their projects, some of which could be rather small projects actually, and trying to fit them in. So I would love to keep that on the table and see if there's a way to support some of these municipalities sort of staying engaged, staying part of the process. I think it can be discouraging if, they have a project and it's, looking like it's 9 or 10 years out and then potentially keeps getting pushed out. If there's a way to fit some of those in along the way, I think it actually would be more equitable to the whole. So I like the idea of fill-in projects and figuring out a way to help municipalities be at the ready. And then the other comment I had, I feel as though staff is really working to help us on a process so that through this TIPper committee, we have more timely, inclusive, and sort of comprehensive review of these projects that are going forward before the full MPO. And really appreciate that and kind of proactively engaging the municipalities. The one comment I have that I want to tread carefully on is this protocol for evaluations to potentially, move projects or, take them off the tip, et cetera. I really would like some time with more thorough and timely review of these projects before we start putting together a protocol on how we're going to be stripping some projects from I think we want to be thinking very comprehensively, and maybe that will enable us to see what that protocol might be. But I do think that, again, from the municipal standpoint, that public process and a whole host of things can influence these projects and time, but it really doesn't change, the fact that they are really valuable projects to the community and to the network as a whole. So I think sometimes delays can be seen as, communities not really doing their part. Sometimes they are honestly engaged in a very laborious process to try to gain the funding and the really very intense community engagement to get the right people on board. And I would hate to penalize municipalities for what can be a really onerous process. So I want to tread carefully on the protocol for evaluations. Thank you.
Thanks, Erin. Yeah, and Ethan, I saw your hand go up, so I didn't know if you had anything directly related to.
Oh, I was gonna, with regard to the project solicitation, actually, because Erin, very much appreciate the comment on that, because I definitely agree. Like, we want to make sure that this is an introduction of ideas with regard to potential protocol, and we want to and will discuss any action we intend to take further at future MPO meetings. That was especially meant to kind of tease out that request. With regard to project solicitations, I also kind of wanted to add to your comment and say the important thing to remember is that in recent years, we may have seen downward trends in application volumes by municipal project proponents, but we are hoping to reverse that through the project design pilot. And while we have and will likely continue to invest a lot in transit projects going forward, one can expect that in addition to the project design pilot, there are also other forms of federal aid for design and planning activities available through the infrastructure law, like federal discretionary grants and earmark funding, that will further create a bench of federal aid projects or projects designed to be funded with federal aid that the MPO may consider. Hence, what I mentioned earlier about this first tier bench of projects, I do have the optimism that we should be able to create that sort of bench of fill-in projects. Once again, that is a good balance of municipal proponent projects and transit projects as well. So thank you again, but just wanted to add that too.
Ethan, before we move on to another topic, I just did Erin or Len have any, just because we're on this transit topic, any follow-ups, or is that kind of?
I'm all set. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you as well. And I want to acknowledge also sort of Len's commitment and thoughts around transit and keeping that at the forefront.
John, you're next.
Thanks, Jen. I just wanted to echo Erin's comment that I think all of these processes that have been presented, Ethan, are extremely responsive to everything that board members have been kind of talking about over the past several months. And I want to just say that I really like the idea of these pre-readiness days. I know that through the TIP process this year, we kind of learned that there were some, municipalities that may not have been responsive or that have had some issues kind of advancing projects. And I think having these readiness days are good because it kind of allows these municipalities that, maybe they have, less staffing, less time to dedicate to these projects as an opportunity to get the updates, learn what's working, not working, and then keep them engaged that, as board members and MPO staff can kind of work with these municipalities to make sure that they're progressing and not at the last minute, at a point where, we do have to kind of reevaluate a project or even remove it. And I do also want to echo Aaron's comments about the rescoring. I think it's pretty important that, if we are going to get to that point, making sure that we have the ability to kind of engage with these municipalities through these pre-readiness days. But I do think that the process of rescoring will be helpful because, as we saw in the last tip cycle, we did have to make some tough decisions, and there were some times when projects had changed that would have rescoring would have at least given us a little bit of information as to how we should make these or interpret these tough decisions. So again, want to say that I'm really appreciative of all the work that was put into all of this work here. And to wrap up, I just had one question regarding the fill-in projects. Was there any consideration for maybe giving a kind of can't think of a good word for this, but like a benchmark of projects that we will and will not consider? Or is it just kind of like we're allowing any of these agencies to kind of put forward any projects at all?
Yeah, I think with regard to that question, while I've been referring to this first tier projects list that's outlined in the operations plan, that is complementary to the TIP universe projects. So this first tier sort of would reflect projects within the TIP universe. It's like a subset that are maybe have a 25% design. Maybe we're scored in a previous year of the TIP, but we're not accepted due to financial constraints, outstanding other any other issues. So we may not necessarily create boundaries as to what projects would be eligible for the TIP universe, just because any project on the universe could be first tier. But I do think as part of the project scenario development process and also the presentation of the TIP universe and TIP project scoring, that should act as multiple layers of filter to maybe sift through certain kinds of work.
Gotcha. All right. Well, thank you for that answer. And again, thank you for all your work. I think a lot of this is great and looking forward to fleshing this out further with other board members and staff.
John? Josh, you're next.
Hey, folks. A great discussion. Thanks. Sorry, I'm with the MBTA. As we develop our CIP process, which we're just doing the internal call for projects soon, and then we'll be scoring them in the fall. It seems that we would be well served to just have those criteria in mind and maybe pre-assemble a list of projects that might be suitable, not to push them, but so that when there's a call, we have things and we've got a sense of which are likely to be scored. Unless I misheard, I think that MPO would be scoring separately from however we score because we've got our own criteria. But if we know what those are, and I come to this being new to the CIP cycle here, as well as what we would be submitting for the MPO's consideration. But I think that there's a good opportunity to pre-lay some of that groundwork. And this may apply to RTAs as well. Obviously, it's not just it's not all about the T. Is this being recorded? Well, it's true. It's not all about the T. But I think that we can do more. I think sometimes people perceive that they don't have a whole lot of time, and frequently that's true. You find out what the capacity is without a lot of notice, and then everything has to kind of come together pretty quickly. So that's not an oversimplification. But the more we understand what those criteria are in advance, and if we can somehow dovetail it with our process, then we can, tee something up so that whatever is available there. So that's easy to say now in August. We'll see what it looks like in February and March. And lastly, would love to get a copy of this deck. Maybe you'll send that out anyway, but just so I don't think I've missed anything of what I wanted to comment on, but it's really helpful to have this discussion.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, absolutely. I think we can be sure to get the deck out, and maybe that's something we can kind of think about is sort of, it seems like there's at least a few items that we might want to have a follow-up conversation. I mean, clearly these are all kind of very initial ideas, but we can think about what forums make sense to continue which conversations. For example, I know, like, to Aaron's comment, the additional kind of information and kind of conversation around the what it might look like to think about a project that we may want to reconsider or rescore or something like that. Seems like something that would probably be right for a whole other conversation in this particular venue. I believe, John, is that you with your hand up the on the regular dial-in phone? Or maybe an accidental hand raise.
Okay, sorry. Like I said, I had my phone muted and I didn't want to disturb anyone, but I wanted to comment. I'm not able to see the slide deck, so I will review it in the very near future when I'm not driving. But Ethan, tremendous job with this information gathering, and I know that portions of the operation plan were circulated through OTP, you know, to me and some of my team to offer some input. But I will look at this more closely and offer some additional thoughts and comment. At the risk of filling up my email and voicemail, I do offer, you know, anytime a project with the community is stuck, you know, just reach out to my office. I will, you know, I have generally the best information available, whether it's from my own team or from our internal systems, from the districts, from the project managers, et cetera, so I can at least research and troubleshoot where we might have you know, a sticking point, whether it's a permit or a right-of-way action or there's design funding concerns and town meeting appropriations and things like that. I've worked very closely with many of the communities in the region, as well as statewide, on this type of stuff, and I offer to continue to do that and try to break those log jams. You know, we try to be proactive, and I like the idea of a kind of like a pre-tip day. It's something I brought to my team about, you know, end of year, calendar year, November, December, is doing a snapshot of our the next upcoming, you know, tip cycle, the 3 to 5 year window, and see, based on our information, our internal systems, which projects are due for submittals or which ones have been delayed that were programmed for submittals, so that way that factors into some of our decision making, you know, at readiness days in February. I think that's a good point, is to do a snapshot. You know, it's only a moment in time, but it does identify where there could be something that you have time to troubleshoot before readiness days, before, you know, I'm getting recommendations from my team that this needs to be pushed out to a future year because it can't be delivered. If we can get this information sooner, then hopefully we can mitigate some of those recommendations and, as I said, kind of break those log jams or clear those sticking points and keep the project moving forward. Thanks for the opportunity. As I said, I will go through Ethan's overall presentation, and if there are more things that generate thoughts and comments, I will offer them back. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John. Lucky to have your assistance. Yeah, keeping projects on track, and I really like not only the pre-readiness days, but also the kind of the quarterly cadence of check-ins, because I think sometimes it takes a little check-in to kind of remind people like, oh, this is something I might want to reach out to John about and troubleshoot before it's kind of down to the wire. Derek, did you have a?
Yeah, yes, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to build on what John said and just say within OTP as well, we're happy to serve as that kind of front line of communication, right? John mentioned risk of clogging his inbox. I know, John, you get so many messages, right? I think, and something we've talked about in reviewing the draft operations plan as well, is having any direct communication come through OTP, and then we'll distribute to Highway Division, just to sort of make that flow a little bit more seamlessly. And just wanted to make sure that was clear that you know, me as the MP liaison and others in OTP were happy to kind of serve as that first initial point of contact, and we'll distribute anything from there. Because yeah, we're always, of course, happy to help out and answer any questions that come up on projects specifically, and questions that members may have. So just wanted to mention that. And I also like the idea on the slide here and what you presented, Ethan, about formalizing the process for transit agencies and others to submit projects earlier on in the year. I know that's been a little bit of a challenge in prior years. And as part of that, right, I know it seems like sometimes there's last minute, like if it's at an MPO meeting, right, we'll have MassDOT projects that are statewide projects that could be considered too. Just wanted to throw it out there that, I agree with Len and others that I think, the focus on transit makes sense because those are projects that are usually more ready in the fiscal year anyway. And they're, just for the, in the spirit of equity and thinking about that. But just wanted to say if it's helpful to have a list of any potential MassDOT projects that are helpful to throw in the mix earlier. So it's not just coming down to the wire, like here's one that we could include, right? So just wanted to throw that out there if it's helpful to have roadway projects as part of that discussion earlier on in the year as well. It could be an option, and happy to help facilitate that. Thanks.
Thanks, Derek, and thanks for the clarification that we should route through you and your team first. And yeah, I imagine it's generally helpful to get at least early indications, whether a formalized process or not, to have known what's get all of us to be thinking a little bit ahead of time about what we might wish to bring to the body. One kind of question I had, seeing no other raised hands at this moment, I just wanted to clarify. In the past, I know we've worked with the MBTA, Boston, thinking through some projects that are kind of mutual priorities, and there's been sort of a question of like who is the project proponent, which can go either way depending on the context. Is there in this I guess proposed system, would there be still an opportunity for a municipal priority that is working in collaboration with an RTA or the T to bring something as part of that earlier deadline as well? Or is the idea to have anything that would be kind of transit transformation coming instead in February?
So to clarify, ideally every single project that the MPO would evaluate in spring would be applied for between late October and the end of the calendar year. That includes the transit projects. The February deadline is meant as a sort of pencils down moment where if, for example, especially in recent years with increasing, or I should say, I was going to say increasingly low, but with continued declines in project application volumes, there's been sort of a necessity for those late application windows. The short answer to your question is, yeah, there will still be a space for that, especially trying to encourage through the transit transformation program partnerships between municipalities and transit providers. But we also want to provide some flexibility, as Josh mentioned, that sometimes other capital planning processes that are ongoing, be it through MassDOT STIP or the MBTA CIP, may highlight things later on that need to be flagged. So short answer is yes. Long answer is the only reason we have these two separate time windows is to make sure that we're not crowding everybody out or certain options out.
Thanks, Susan. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I guess maybe I think, at least for me, I'll say it might be useful to, we've been on this slide for a little bit, and I wonder if we might advance to the next one just to see if it brings up any other questions. That being said, if anyone has anything again related to fill in, we can discuss that too. Well, folks, read this slide over again. I had one question here, which was more just like curiosity. My assumption, so I noticed the cadence here is twice a year for transit projects and quarterly for other kind of municipally led projects. Is part of that rationale that transit projects tend to have a little bit more flexibility given federal transit versus federal highway, and or is there? I was just curious about some of the thinking behind that.
Yeah, so to Eric's comment earlier about scheduling, I will also work to make sure that I can put all of this up on a schedule over the next year so folks can better see the overlap. But yes, part of the reason why there would be only a twice a year cadence for the transit projects is that there is a little bit more flexibility with regard to carryover funding, but also just recognizing that the number of transit projects on the tip is generally less than the other investment programs by number. So just as an example, with the MBTA's projects that are MPO funded priorities for the MBTA, that would be the Petalin Park project, the Jackson Square Station Accessibility Project, Columbus Avenue Phase 2, and Nubian Square Circulation, along with the Rail Transformation Project. So at only 5 items there, the MBTA may not have updates quarterly for such a small list, relatively speaking. And the ideal as well with this process shown on screen is this is not meant to be I mentioned that the tip readiness days exercise is a big lift. This is not meant to look at all 70 projects in the regional target program. It's really there to provide sort of an ongoing, finger on the pulse opportunity for specific projects that may have issue. That doesn't preclude a transit project that may need to be monitored repeatedly or may benefit from ongoing discussion from being added to this list. It's more just the 2 different workflows. We also don't want to ask too much of folks at the T to sort of come and speak about only a couple of projects, even though they've been great partners in this process of outlining this MOU. I'll also take this opportunity to mention that each of these activities has been discussed with and developed with partnership from both MassDOT, the T, MWRTA, and CADA here too. So also thanks to them for all this effort and helping to put this together.
Thank you. That makes sense. And yeah, huge thanks to everyone at MPO staff, OTP, the T, the RTAs who've kind of come together with this kind of proposal. It was yeah, definitely very responsive to what we've been talking about, and it seems so far like folks are excited the direction it's headed. Anyone else have questions or thoughts around the topic of these quarterly project readiness updates? Should we move on to that next topic? Right. Seeing none there, we advance to the following one, which was, yes, pre-readiness. Maybe, oh, sorry, just if we could go back just quickly to the pre-readiness days, just wanted to see if there was any other thoughts around, yes, yeah, the new process pre-readiness days. It's possible everyone's already commented everything they had to say on this one, but wanted to give one more opportunity before we move on. I know this, back in the spring, there were, certain conversations around maybe municipalities having a sense of where they thought they were in the process. And so maybe that differing from some of what came out of readiness days. So I think this is a great movement in the direction of kind of getting more clarity before the MPO meetings themselves. Great. So maybe I think the last item, which I think we've already flagged, the readiness conditions. We've already kind of flagged that this is one that perhaps we might wish a little bit to explore, have a little bit more inputs into thinking through what this could look like. Ethan, what would be most helpful here? Is it, were you kind of looking for kind of just a sense of, yes, this is something we want to continue looking into, and then staff might come back with kind of a proposal, or maybe just even like additional information on kind of what delays have looked like, so that we can kind of wrap our heads around it a little bit more?
Yeah, so I just mentioned this. This is not included in the operations plan, but it has come up with some comments from MPO members and other stakeholders in the project development process. Namely, this isn't something that is required to be moved forward or that we're recommending be moved forward with. more just providing a space to highlight and tease this idea out in case it is something that we want to pursue. I will note that one of the comments that we received this past spring when there was that discussion in federal fiscal year 2027, that we very much understood that that was an uncomfortable but necessary discussion to have around those projects, and that one of the ways to make it seem a little bit less strenuous and a little bit more fair rather than singling one project out versus another would be to have a more structured set of requirements and conditions as to when a project might trigger that kind of issue, to help sort of create a prioritization scale on where projects may need to be reallocated or rebalanced.
Thank you. So I guess in light of that, be curious if anyone has initial inclinations of, is this something we'd like to explore, kind of thinking through what a process could look like, or do we want to table this for now? Then
This is Len. So can I talk?
yes, yes,
Okay,
yes.
just making sure, just making sure. And so I really appreciate Aaron's warning that we should tread carefully. But I really do think we need to work on this. And we may decide that it's not, we can't come up with a way to do it effectively. But yeah, I think it was uncomfortable last time, and I think we do need to try to make it clear that we aren't singling out any project, or that we're just in a bad mood for whatever reason. so yeah, let's try to work on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. Aaron.
Yeah, I think I would add, I would be, willing and eager to work on this as well. And I'm wondering if Ethan has some ideas for categories, because maybe it sort of starts a little bit more broadly in terms of categories that are going to frame this type of analysis that could be sort of a helpful tool. And there are many tools through this process and a lot of, I think, scoring that already happens. But I think just from our perspective, as we're looking at it and hearing from the municipalities, so that there's, that it certainly is sort of a, level playing field for everyone. So glad to work on it with this committee.
Thanks, Aaron. Ethan.
Yeah, to kind of tease out a little bit of that, the consequence for each of these conditions wouldn't naturally be the same. I think a good place to start is addressing a question that we've heard even before the development of this past tip, which is, when and should staff rescore projects on the tip? I don't have the number off the top of my head, but folks that read through the tip may note that there are many projects that are on the tip right now that are using scoring criteria that are 2 sets of criteria out of date, specifically criteria that was last in effect in 2019, which is to say that there's a number of projects on the tip that, for purposes of comparison, their scores don't really line up with a level of parity to more recently funded tip projects. 2, as I mentioned earlier, the tip cost change committee, while that did establish rules around when projects could be requested by MPO members for rescoring, that also sort of put a lot of the onus on specifically targeting projects, or rather singling out specific projects to be rescored, which again kind of goes towards what I mentioned earlier about creating an uncomfortable situation, singling out a project. So also potentially creating norms around when do we rescore a project, just because the consequence of a new score does not necessarily mean a change in its programming year, more just a better understanding of it. I also think it, from a staff perspective, it also helps provide a little bit more structure so staff can expect what may need to come through. Also, just another point, I again don't have the exact number, but I believe under those tip cost change thresholds that were set, there were about 13 different projects this past year that could have triggered that rescoring condition, which is a not insignificant amount of level of effort from staff to rescore that many projects. So I think it would also be helpful to kind of investigate that further, because like I said, it gives a certain level of certainty.
Ethan. That sounds very helpful in that, if staff already knows these 13 projects have had cost increases, maybe they need they have a rescoring, and you can do that not during the peak tip time. I could imagine some benefits that Len.
And this is a question directed to Ian. And so a project only needs to be rescored, if its scope changes, right? If the cost just changes, there's really no need to rescore it. It's just that, if the cost comes with something else, like some other element is added to the project, that will need to rescore it, correct?
So I'm going to link the draft policy change recommendation sheet that was put together in the chat. It's under section 3.3, just mentioning that for the recording. The threshold or the policy that was adopted by that committee indicated any project with a cost increase of $2.5 million or 25% would potentially be subject to a rescore. But as you also mentioned too, it would also factor in any project with a change in scope as well.
Right. I guess what I'm getting at is, okay, we could say that, and this is in terms of the work, Ian, if a project just goes up in cost, then the rescoring would be pretty easy because you don't really have to do pretty much anything if it's not, the scope hasn't changed, it's just the cost has changed, and so I'm just trying to get a sense of the actual increase in workload. Not that we need to debate this now, but just to get a sense of what the ask may be on staff. And I guess I'm asking that not so much to challenge you, as to make sure that I'm not failing to understand something basic about the need to rescore.
Yeah, I'll kind of answer this in two parts. So one, to brace for this potential need, staff are already intending to look at the projects that are funded in federal fiscal year 2026 that were funded there through this last tip development cycle and scoring those in the next tip. There were a few projects, such as I believe it was the bus acquisition project. Oh, that was actually scored already. There is the facility reconstruction project or modernization project for the Cape Ann Transportation Authority, which is funded in both federal fiscal year 25 and 26, but is not yet scored. That project, along with any additional funding that may be required for other transit projects, will be reevaluated in this next tip to put a score on it. So even though it is not being reconsidered for funding, we want to also make sure that any projects on the tip that have that kind of lack of a score are covered, at least if they're in the regional target program. So one, we want to set that as a foundation this coming year. To answer your question more directly, Len, the one thing as far as level of effort to consider, as I kind of just mentioned, there are a decent number of projects, mostly between federal fiscal years 2025 and 2027. I think there's even one in 28 that are using that very old criteria set, which is a pre-2020, pre-2019 criteria list. That criteria used a 134-point scale, and this new criteria that we are committed to uses 100. There's also a lot of different criteria. Functionally, in order to rescore those projects, we would need to ask those applicants to reapply to the tip, given the changes in criteria, given the new scale, and given the fact that there has been a new LRTP since then with new investment programs and categories as well. So I don't think there's a large number of projects under that case, but I also want to be mindful of the conditions that may get triggered for the project proponents as well if we do that. So again, it's not something I think that as staff we're averse to by any regard, but I think part of this proposed exercise would be outlining what the level of effort could look like, and also utilizing these next few months to kind of take steps towards that to lighten that level of effort. I think I just want to also take this opportunity to mention, like, this is a recurring theme across all of these proposed actions. There are commitments of time, not only from staff and the project proponents, but other stakeholders involved, in particular MassDOT. And I do not want to understate the amount of work that, MassDOT has, already conducts with regard to evaluating project readiness at both the, Highway Division headquarters, district, and OTP levels. So we're trying to manage each of those aspects going forward on this.
One more thing, Jen. This is on. So with respect to the rescoring of applying the new scoring criteria. I remember the first time, not this last time that we went through the creating new criteria, we kind of looked at how the changes criteria we would measure up against the old criteria. So we had some sense of how that would affect the score. I imagine you may have done that in the second iteration because we weren't really involved in that second iteration. Because up until you said that you'd have to really go back to the proponents and ask them to pretty much reapply, I was like, oh yeah, we'll just rescore it. But now with that element of it, it's like, I hate to really burden, for lack of a better word, the proponents with having to essentially reapply. So for me as a person, that would be, and I usually do look at the criteria a lot when I look at evaluating projects. If you did that kind of conversion, from the old criteria to the new criteria, it'd be good enough for me in terms of making an evaluation. So I just put that out there. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jen, I hope you don't mind if I use a Boston project, the Boylston Street project, just as an example to kind of talk it through.
Go for it.
So yeah, Len, exactly to what you said, I think, so the Boylston Street project that I just mentioned is one of those examples of projects. It is funded in federal fiscal year 2026. And because it has been on the tip, especially those near-term program years, this happens a lot, because it has been on the tip for so many years, I think that project applied to be on the tip in calendar year 2017. So that is one of those cases where it's about 7 or 8 years since the first application package was developed, and the scope has also changed due to recent development in Fenway since then. Hence the discussion we had with this past year in developing the federal fiscal year 2025-29 tip. So I think part of this effort may be outlining a list of projects that might see that, or may have historically triggered it, and seeing what that level of effort could have been, or just looking at projects that maybe, hey, and this is sort of a personal, or I should say professional goal of mine, making sure there aren't any projects on the tip that have that outdated of a scoring threshold on them to avoid that. I also know, for example, this past year when we were looking at the fiscal 27 projects, the Central and South Main Streets project in Ipswich was in a similar position there as well, with another one of those 134-point scale associations. I think it was first added to the tip calendar year 2018 in that case, maybe earlier. So those are just two examples off the top of my head that are well before not only my time, but I think even the previous tip manager's time.
Thanks, Ethan. And just to, I guess, I feel like we've gotten levels of kind of abstractor. I'm not sure if the right word is, but just to clarify kind of what we're discussing here, we have our tip criteria that we use to score projects that are kind of that municipalities apply to the tip in the fall, and that we're also now considering using to score projects that transit agencies might bring in as fill-in projects. So there's that sort of like set of tip criteria. Then we're also kind of discussing how we might, I kind of want to use a little different word, but a set of criteria for ourselves to think through when we might, how we might direct staff when it would make sense to kind of rescore the projects given certain changes. And my sense is, and correct me if I'm mistaken here, that we would want to do this if we think that a project it's looking like it might be one of those ones that we might need to have these like kind of difficult conversations in the spring about, like a project that is being delayed multiple times, or it has a big cost increase and that's causing kind of ripple effects in the tip. For those type of projects where we're thinking there might need to be some conversations and we might want to have some information about, if we do need to start comparing projects to one another to decide, okay, if we need to push one of these out, which one do we push out? If one needs to actually leave the tip as the extreme case, how do we make those decisions? Is that, I'm not sure, hopefully I'm making this a little, like, not making this more confusing, but is that generally kind of how you describe that?
Yes, thank you for grounding me, because we are talking about a lot of different kinds of criteria. So what is on the slide here is basically setting rules and guidelines around conditions under which, or triggers for which, projects that see changes in their scope may need further evaluation. The other layer being, how do we evaluate them? And under what criteria would they be evaluated? So again, this is all discussion for future meetings. This isn't anything we want to iron out here today, but it's planning.
Cool. Eric.
Yeah, I was just gonna agree with you, Jen, and say that, like, I've always viewed the concept of doing some rescoring or additional evaluation to a project less about, oh, do we take it off the tip and say, no, we never want to do this project, but more about we have to choose to delay something. Why are, what's the choice? And a lot of times it's about available funding, right? That's a big influence. That influences, can we fit a project in a future year, and how, and Ethan is trying to put the puzzle together. It's very complicated. But I think it's important to also just look like which project is scoring better now that the cost has gone up or the project has changed. But I've always felt it's not so much about, and I just, given my history on the MPO, we've rarely completely taken projects off the tip. I don't think that's what the focus is. It's more about how are we making a decision to delay a project, and using the scoring information to inform that decision.
Sarah. Anyone else have, I recognize that we're getting close to it. I think we had said 2:30, but correct me if I'm wrong on that. I think it might be good to start kind of wrapping up the conversation, but if anyone had any additional thoughts on this, my sense of the room is that, probably we do want to kind of discuss this further. I feel like it would be useful, not deciding one way or another we're going to adopt a standard or not, or guidelines, but that it would probably have some utility to talk this through in advance of being in the situation we were on in the spring. Seeing really some nods. All right. Well then, I guess let's kind of move to members' items. Ooh, all right. Does anyone have anything to kind of bring up before this committee that wasn't touched on today? Anything that I'm going to spend a little time, and of course we're going to send out the slide deck because there's a lot to digest. Maybe also I'll dig up and then resend the retro board that we did, because I think that was just kind of remind us I think we've covered a lot of the topics that came up on that, but just to kind of ground ourselves in that. Anything else? I guess I don't think Ethan and I haven't had a chance to discuss kind of when our next meeting will be, but so look for communication on that unless you have something to add on that point, Ethan, before we wrap up.
I do not have any surprises to share yet, but the next meeting would likely be a kickoff meeting for the federal fiscal year 2630 tip sometime in October.
Great. Thank you. Well, thanks so much for joining, everyone. That was a lot of content, and I think a good discussion. I believe very helpful in kind of guiding where we go next.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. I guess we'll do a formal motion to adjourn.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Thank you, Len.
Don't want to go to jail. Don't want to go to jail because we failed to adjourn properly. So I make that motion.
Len motions. We have a second. Thanks, everyone.